you're probably just buying clothes at a really mass scale that's incredibly impractical and not necessary, and completely diluting the value of each piece that you're adding to your wardrobe, not really thinking through how every single thing that you're purchasing is going to actually cash out into actual outfits for you on the daily. Hi, welcome to my video. This is Anything to Wear, and I talk all things fashion. And in today's video, I want to talk about why you probably hate all of the clothes in your closet right now. You hate every single outfit. You feel like you have nothing to wear. This is such a universal experience and something that I've definitely struggled with a lot. But I feel like in the last few months to years, I've definitely come around to creating a closet that I genuinely enjoy and that is pretty easy to work with. And obviously that didn't just happen. I've definitely had to change my shopping habits. I want to give you guys some very easy and practical tips for building a closet that you actually like, and how to buy clothes that you won't end up hating in 6 months. Let's get started. Okay, first things first, and this is probably one of the most important mistakes on this list, but you probably hate all the clothes in your closet because you're buying too much clothes. You're just buying too much. I think with mass production manufacturers and fast fashion companies like Shein or even Zara, it has really skewed our perception of how much clothes that we need and how often we should be buying clothes. Definitely social media has to be to blame for this too, with, all these constant hauls that are in your face, on your feed. Every other scroll is someone that's bought like 5 to 7 items in the last week. What this really does when you're buying at this really rapid, high volume pace, you don't really get the time to think about how these pieces will actually work with your closet, and you're creating a lot of disharmony in the wardrobe that you're building. And what that leads to then is a lot of these disjointed, like mass purchases that you really can't form a lot of outfits with. Like, you really, in theory, should be able to form a ton more outfits because you have way more clothes. You're probably just buying clothes at a really mass scale that's incredibly impractical and not necessary, and completely diluting the value of each piece that you're adding to your wardrobe, not really thinking through how every single thing that you're purchasing is going to actually cash out into actual outfits for you on the daily. I also feel like with these mass hauls, what ends up happening is people buy 6 to 7 to 8 pieces that they know will form outfits together within that same haul, but not really translate to the rest of their closet, almost like you're buying 3 individual outfits at a time. And trust me, I get it. I get super bored with my clothes too incredibly quickly, which is not good. I'm trying to really shake that habit. I completely empathize, but if that is you, I encourage you to try renting your wardrobe instead of buying 6 to 7 new pieces every single month, every 2 months that you're going to get rid of anyways. You know yourself. I've been in those shoes. I know that this is a really hard pattern to break, and I know what the behavior is. So if that's you, I highly recommend trying Nuuly. I've been a Nuulier for a really long time as I've tried to figure out my corporate wardrobe, which is a whole conversation within itself. I could make a different video about that, but I found it incredibly useful when I was still trying to understand what pieces make the most sense to invest in, because constantly placing a huge H&M order every single season was just not working out. I always end up hating my clothes after like a month and was itching to make another haul purchase, which again is not practical. So highly recommend Nuuly. I've left my referral code down below if you guys want to use it. If you don't want to use it, feel free to sign up directly on the website. But if you use my link down below, you do get an incentive, and so do I. So I'm about to move on to this tip, but I really want to put into perspective how today's consumer trends are not normal. There's this older Substack article titled "You Bought 68 Items of Clothing Last Year" that was published January 30th of 2025. And basically it gives a breakdown about how much clothes we're buying and comparing that to the amount of clothes that people used to buy before these mass manufacturers like Shein. And it says in the 1960s in the US, average households purchases were around 25 clothing items per year, per household. And then a separate source estimates that in the 1980s, the average American bought 12 new items every single year. So even from the 1980s to the 1960s, that's a pretty big jump where people were probably only buying 25 items of clothing per household a year to then buying 20 items for their self in the 1980s per year. But then we have an even more dramatic jump in the fact that people on average bought 68 items of clothing in 2025. And globally, clothing purchases per person have increased about 60% since the year 2000. Okay, so what should you do instead? I've tried this one tip a lot over the last few years. I always fail because it's incredibly hard. But whenever I'm in the thick of it and actually making myself stick to this self-implemented torture, I only allow myself to buy one fashion item per month. And I find that every single time that I do this, I'm incredibly intentional about the clothes that I get to buy because I only get to buy one a month. Are you kidding? And in theory, if I were to stick to this challenge all the way to the end of the year, I'd only buy 12 clothing items the entire year. And so I find myself being very, very careful and absolutely falling in love with the pieces that I do allow myself to get. Because I'm treating fashion as this incredibly scarce indulgence, this very scarce resource, it just makes it so much easier to appreciate the clothes that I'm actually bringing into my closet and makes me think, okay, I really want to buy this, but will I really get a lot of use out of it? Does it really make sense for my closet? I only get to buy 12 things this year and I don't want to make a mistake. And honestly, I don't think that this standard is incredibly unrealistic. I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes your body changes a ton, or sometimes you have a lot of major events throughout the year, and you can make exceptions for these special situations. But from a personal experience, right, as like a person living a very average life, I have found it so incredibly useful. And I'm doing it right now. It's only February, and I've already bought 2 things. And the 2 things that I have in my closet, I love, and I'm having a lot of fun actually being incredibly selective with what I want to purchase this year. So stay tuned to see if I stick through all the way to the end. Okay, let's move on finally. Mistake number 2 that you're probably making if you hate all the clothes in your closet is that you're probably not doing enough research when you're shopping for items. This might sound a little bit tone deaf, but I think it's the hill that I'm willing to die on. Life is too expensive for your clothes to be cheap. And I don't mean $ wise. You can find an incredibly good piece of clothing for very affordable. I mean value wise, like the quality of your clothing. And there's a lot of really amazing resources out there for understanding how to get the most bang for your buck. But that takes research. I think I've definitely transitioned from shopping being this very casual experience to being a very intentional experience. And don't get me wrong, like not every single purchase that you do has to take like 7 to 8 business days to research and think about. But even just taking a couple minutes to understand what the clothes is made out of, where it's coming from, just like internally reflecting on how the piece will actually fit into your closet. I feel like this whole video is probably going to be a drag on Shein and fast fashion. It doesn't have to be. Occasionally, those manufacturers also produce clothing that are made of natural fibers and a little bit like better structurally. And if you find those opportunities, obviously take care of them or take advantage of them, especially with how expensive life is. I mean, it's so expensive to pay for rent, to pay for clothes, to pay for transportation, insurance, like a lot of these things we don't have control over. But you have 1000% control over how you choose to spend your money on clothing. And again, just to put into perspective, the potential lifespan that natural fibers can have compared to synthetic materials, I want to share some facts with you guys from this research that was done in 2018 about this exact topic. Sorry guys, I'm getting a million notifications. I'm so popular. But anyways, okay. This research found that silk garments showed the longest average lifespan in use of about an average of 9.4 years total. Cashmere and wool blends also tended to last a long time with an average of 6 to 7 year lifespan. Pure wool garments lasted an average of 5.3 years on average. And so the key takeaway here is that natural higher quality fibers, especially silk, wool, and cashmere, tend to persist longer and actually actual use than lower grade synthetics in consumer wardrobes. But of course, it also depends on how well you take care of the garment, because a separate research report found that fast fashion garments, often synthetic, heavy, and inexpensive, typically endure on average 6 to 18 months before wearing out under normal use, whereas slow fashion, higher quality garments, often natural or responsibly sourced fibers, commonly last 5 to 10 plus years when cared for properly. One more thing that I'd like to add before I move on from this tip about research is more from like a personal angle, like anecdotally. I think when you also take the time to research who your clothes is coming from and invest time in learning about the brand, that creates an emotional connection with your clothing. For example, not that long ago, I was watching one of my favorite creators' videos on TikTok, and I really love her content because she shares a lot of these like slow fashion learnings and things like that. And she made a mini video all about Vivienne Tam. She's a Chinese designer who was incredibly popular like in the 90s, 2000s, and I had never heard of, truthfully. And so I did like a mini deep dive on this designer, and I fell in love with some of her like skirt designs. And that's when I decided, okay, this is going to be my first purchase of 2026. And so then I went to the secondhand market and flipped through a lot of different clothing and pieces that were up for sale. And ultimately, I found my first Vivienne Tam skirt in pristine condition for $15 from ThredUp. And I feel like that's a really good example of finding a piece of clothing that is not cheap value-wise. It is 100% linen and the lining is silk. And two, a piece of clothing that I'm emotionally connected with and really value and admire the designer that it came from. And now I feel like I'm gonna have my Vivienne Tam skirt from here to the day that I die. Like, I'm so obsessed with it and I've already gotten use out of it. Honestly, it was such a fun experience to hunt for this skirt that I want to do it over and over and over again. So all of that to say, if you want to hate your clothing less, definitely spend a lot more time researching what the clothes is made from and where it came from. Okay guys, this is my last mistake for this video. I know I've rambled on a ton. I know we've talked a lot about consumerism throughout this video, so this is a very on topic, and I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this. You probably hate half the things in your closet because you think that buying more expensive things, designer things, will make your closet more stylish. I feel like there's a lot of these mid-range brands that are teetering on the edge of fast fashion, like Aritzia, that make us think that because we're spending a little bit more money on these items, it's going to last longer, it's going to make us more fashionable. And I really love this mini series that I saw floating around on the internet the other day of this creator talking about all the ways to not Aritzia, because they use a lot of synthetic fibers, as well as other brands like Mango and Bershka and Zara. As someone who has grown up as like a thrifter, their clothing is not cheap. I am someone who tries to spend as little as possible on the clothing that I buy while preserving the quality of things. And it's really hard to do that at stores like Aritzia. And don't get me wrong, they do have some good contenders in their mix. Again, I feel like they really get consumers to play into this idea to overspend and not get the value from what they're spending on. Okay, again, sorry if the angle keeps changing. My camera keeps dying. Okay, anyways, I think I'm almost done. I actually forgot what I was talking about. I think the very last thing that I want to touch on for this tip is, and I've said this before, there's not one single item that's going to make your closet. There's not one single item that's going to make you more stylish. There's not one single item that's going to change your entire wardrobe. I think at the end of the day, it is a collection of really good pieces that ultimately is going to make the difference. And it has to be things that you genuinely like. Like, for example, I know I cannot rock a tabby. I mean, I have been more tempted lately because they're everywhere. But I know that it wouldn't make sense in my closet. And how do I know that? Because I just don't think that I like them. I think that they're incredibly cool. I think that they're stylish. I think that they make other people look awesome. But when I first saw the tabby, I did not have this like gut reaction of, oh my God, I need those shoes. They're lovely. I need them in my closet. It was an initial like, that is an interesting pair of shoe. And I think I just take that as a sign of that's not for me and that's okay. And no amount of Pinterest and ads is going to change my positioning on that. And I know that there's a lot of people probably out there that look at this shoe and go, okay, this is the next hot shoe. I need it in my closet because without it, I can't be stylish. How will I consider myself like a stylish person if I don't have this one shoe? And on top of that, they're very expensive. A lot of the tabbies that I've seen out there, and maybe sure there's more affordable iterations, but I think the Mason Margiela tabby is like upwards of $1,000. I could not fathom spending that amount of money on something that I'm not absolutely in love with. I don't know. Again, I think life is too expensive. Our money is too valuable to really be doing that anymore. And so if you're someone who falls into the habit quite a bit, something that you can do instead, and this is so easy, is sure, like spend a little bit more time on Pinterest. And before you read the comments, before you look at the person who's wearing them, before like anything else, just look at the clothing and truly ask yourself if you have this innate just like gushing over the pieces of clothing that you're seeing on screen. And if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter how much it costs. It doesn't matter how many people are wearing it. It doesn't matter how luxury and niche and cool something is. You don't need it. And it's probably not something that you're actually going to like. And it's going to be something that you get rid of in a couple of months. I think that one is obviously simultaneously one of the easiest and hardest tips on this list, because you just have to have a lot of honesty and self-reflection to be able to build up that muscle. And when you do, you won't even realize it, but that is your taste. That is your personal style. It doesn't happen overnight. So it definitely, takes a little bit of practice, but that's probably one of the most valuable tools throughout this whole video, is really developing your own sense of personal style so that you can stop buying things that you're going to hate in 6 months. All right, guys, I have talked a ton throughout this video, and I actually somehow sat here for an hour. Editing this is going to be so much fun. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed today's sit down talking video. I will see you guys next week. All right, that's it. Bye.